morning, Marin. Thanks so much for joining me. How are you doing today?
Yeah, it's so great to be here, Sarah. Thank you so much for inviting me. Yeah, I'm really good. Sun is shining. Happy to be here.
Excellent. It's beautiful. Whereabouts are you in the world?
So I live in Hereford in the UK. Yeah, I moved here about 6 months ago to be nearer to my sister. Yeah, so still getting to know the area, but it's like beautiful countryside. We're really close to Wales. So yeah, lovely.
Yeah, it's beautiful. Yeah, my parents were up kind of that way before. Where did you move from?
From Suffolk, so in East Anglia, so like the complete opposite side of the country.
Yeah. Oh, nice. Oh, that's cool. I always quite like that bit actually, when you move and you kind of get kind of what's around and you find the local shops and parks and pubs and stuff. Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah, it's been lovely. Hard though in a pandemic. That's the only thing I'll say.
Yeah, probably not ideal, but you're there, you're doing it. That's awesome. Awesome. Well done. So can you give us a little intro as to kind of who you are, what you do, how you got into it? Tell us a little about you and your thing.
Yeah, sure. So I'm Marin. My pronouns are she and her. I am a millennial. I am a mother and I'm a therapist. So I work mainly with millennials because I'm a millennial myself, and I work on all things around this feeling of not being good enough. That kind of arose through my work, but it was part of my journey as well. And I kind of realized how all of these things are connected to self-esteem and this feeling of inadequacy. You know, I struggled a lot with my own mental health, my own self-esteem, right from when I was a teenager up and into my 20s. And I did a lot of self-sabotaging, a lot of drinking drugs, and just being really all over the place emotionally. And at that time, I don't think I realized that it was to do with self-esteem. Like, I'm outwardly quite a confident person. And it's weird how those things can kind of exist and be true. Like, I don't think I'm faking confidence. Like, I am genuinely confident. But yeah, through my own healing work, it's been like 10 years of therapy and training and stuff. Now I look back and I can see how all of that was kind of connected to me not feeling good enough and having low self-esteem myself. And it's been like a huge transformation. Like, I feel like such a different person now. So yeah, they're the sort of people that I really like to help. You know, that's my own experience, my own journey. And I know now how different you can feel. And I think when you're in it, you're not always aware of what's going, like, you're kind of not aware of the story you're telling yourself or how all of these things are connected. But it makes sense, doesn't it? You know, your self-esteem is essentially your relationship with yourself. And I think mental health is really complex. There are loads of factors that can go into affecting our mental health. It's not just self-esteem. But I think whatever you're dealing with in life, whatever challenges are coming your way, your relationship with yourself is going to affect how resilient you are, how able you are to deal with things. And also can sometimes we get stuck perpetuating our own unhappiness because of how we feel about ourselves. So yeah, that's the sort of work I do and where I come from.
There's thoughts firing all over the place as you're talking there. I feel like I'm going to have to try and catch them as I by. It's so fascinating. I love this point that you made about kind of I guess about awareness when it comes to kind of your own self-worth and your own self-esteem, and also maybe not realizing when you're right in the mix of it, in the heat of it, kind of what that it's often only, isn't it, with hindsight, and I can say that from my own experience, it's only with hindsight when you look back and you go, oh no, that wasn't cool actually. So how do you work with people to kind of maybe bring about some awareness, like throw some light onto it when you're in the mix of it, you know, like right here, right now? How can you identify how your self-esteem and your self-worth is? And also, are those two things the same? Presumably they're pretty linked.
So I think it's hard to, I think people use self-worth and self-esteem kind of interchangeably, so it can be quite hard. I think really, I suppose, self-esteem is kind of how we feel about ourselves, our self-concept, we would say in sort of psychological terms, you know, like the idea of ourselves in our head. Whereas self-worth, I suppose, is more like you're always worthy. Your self-worth actually doesn't change. That's sort of inherent in you as a human being. and it's more, that's kind of a static. However, I think people use those words interchangeably, so that I think can be confusing. Yeah. With the sort of piece about awareness, yeah, it's really hard, isn't it? I think we're not always aware of the chatter in our minds that's going on all of the time. And so I think the first part is about slowing down and trying to listen to actually what you're saying to yourself. That can be really hard, because I think it does sort of fade into the background. So actually, just really trying to notice when we're, if we mess up, what are we saying to ourselves? Are we being really hard? Are we being really critical? Are we even shaming ourselves? Are we really saying you're a bad person, rather than, oh, I just made a mistake? And I think that's the first part. And I think that's why therapy is really helpful, because in therapy, you're asking someone to talk to you, me, the therapist, about what's going on in their own minds. What is the conversation they're having? And I think sometimes that can be the first time that people really hear what they're saying to themselves, or what these core beliefs are. Because I think a lot of self-esteem, it starts in childhood. Like, I think we do perpetuate it as adults, and of course all of our experiences feed into that picture of ourselves we have. But a lot of it comes from these core beliefs that we've internalized when we're young. And I think sometimes also people think, well, I had a good childhood, I had a lot of praise, I had a lot of love, so how can I possibly be struggling? And I think the thing is
that was me.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
I think
I didn't have a very traumatic childhood. It was lovely, so like I shouldn't have an issue, right? And that's
and this is actually a really big thing. A lot of people I work with are sort of this end of the scale. I think the thing is, if you're either extreme, you had like a really maybe not so great childhood, or you had a lot of praise and affection, it can cause kind of similar issues. Because if you constantly have praise, you're told you're doing a good job, there's a lot of emphasis on achievement, on doing well at school, being good. All of that can feed into this idea that you're only worthy if you're doing excellently, if you're perfect. And so actually, because perfect is unattainable, nobody is perfect. So if that's the thing that you've been rewarded for, then you kind of form this idea, well, I'm not good enough because I'm not perfect. And so actually that's probably what I see more in my client work, is not necessarily people that have had really awful parents or really traumatic experiences, but actually parents that have been telling them they're doing really well all the time. And my clients and the people I work with have internalized that as I'm only worthy if I'm achieving the best, if I'm doing really well. And that's an enormous amount of pressure to be carrying around with you all of the time, and it will never be enough. However well you do, if that's where you're coming from, it won't ever feel like you get there.
Yeah, that's such an interesting point, and I can identify with that so much. Like, I have beautiful supportive parents. They've been nothing but supportive, but even now as a 30-year-old woman, as a 30-year-old mother myself, I'm like, oh, what's mum and dad gonna think? It's so crazy, isn't it? And just picking up on your point about kind of millennials as well, because that's really interesting. Do you see kind of generational differences? Is some of that, first of all, what is a millennial? What's kind of the definition, the kind of age for that? And what is it about that age group that we're in that, what are some of the things that are kind of or identifiable about that? How does that affect some of these things like self-esteem and pressure and generational differences and stuff? Because it's so fascinating, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is, isn't it? I love this topic. I've done a lot of research and reading into it. So to start with, I wanted to work with millennials because I don't know if you've noticed, but before, a lot of therapists were older. There's a big generational divide between therapists, and I was quite aware. I was a young person training to be a therapist, and I was aware of that gap. I'm thinking there are people out there like me that want to come to therapy, and maybe I understand them better than these sort of older therapists. So that sort of started my interest in it. But actually, when you look into it, millennials have had quite a pressured upbringing and environment. I suppose, obviously I can't speak to what it was like to grow up before because I wasn't there. But from what I understand is there wasn't so much pressure to achieve. This sort of, our education system has become very about testing kids, putting a lot of pressure on them. And so we grow up in an environment which is all about ranking where we fall against our peers. You know, right from when we go to school, when we're about 4 or 5, you know, we're doing our first SATs, I think, when you're like 6 years old.
Yeah,
there's a lot of pressure to read and write. So right from that
and
moment,
groups in school, wasn't there, talking about ranking, you know, different sets,
the sets, yeah,
all the lower sets.
yeah. So already you're internalizing a story about how good you are in comparison to everybody else, rather than being celebrated for the fact that we're all different and we all have a different set of skills. Then you kind of leave school, whether you go to university or whether you go out to the job market. Again, this is very like competitive. We're again sort of ranked how good we are for the market, or whatever that means. And I think, of course, there might have been some of that before, but I think it's just been intensified a lot for our generation.
Plus, everything is then on social media as well.
Yeah. So then as we're adults, that's translating, all the kids growing up now have the social media aspect, which, as you can see, is kind of an intense version of all of that. You know, we're doing it in our social lives as well as in the school system, as well as in the job market. And also for millennials, this is an interesting point that I kind of only realised sort of through doing my own research, is there's something called like an oversubscribed childhood. So our like generation of parents, they suddenly had a lot of pressure for their kids to be doing a lot. So going to all the clubs, you know, they should be having music lessons, they should be going to drama, they should be like doing all of these things. And so a millennial generation, a lot of us didn't have any time to kind of be free, to just relax. It was very much like go, do. And of course, then that leaves adults feeling like, if I'm not doing, then I'm doing something wrong, because my whole childhood has been around all of these things that I need to be doing. And that's really different from generations before us. You know, generations before us, you've had like the latchkey kids, you know, that they would let themselves in after school because their parents would be out at work.
Not heard that term, but that's quite nice.
Yes, they would have a latchkey put around their necks and then come home from school, and they'd kind of be on their own. You know, they'd either be looking after siblings or they'd be out in the street playing, but there wasn't this sort of pressure from parents
to dinner at 6 o'clock kind of thing.
Yeah. And so they developed their own resilience, you know, they developed their own, whereas our generation is kind of the first generation that's just had all of that pressure right from, as I said, again, this is when you're like 4 or 5, this starts, maybe before, because I think even nurseries put some of this pressure on as well. So
yeah. And then also going back to the ranking and the testing thing, even the hobbies that you're doing outside of school for, you know, for fun, the piano lessons or the ballet lessons or whatever, there's levels and exams and grades in those as well, right? Yeah, that's so crazy. Do you see things shifting and changing again for the next generation, coming back to this idea that we're mothers and that we're mums, and kind of taking this awareness? It feels like a lot of things are changing just generally in society about kind of awareness and mental health and these more open conversations. It does feel like very different from my parents' generation to my generation, and I wonder if that's going to shift again. I know you're not a fortune teller, but you know,
I hope so.
Do you feel like it's changing and moving, and how can we not control it, but what are some of the things that we can be aware of in terms of messages that we're giving to our kids, and ways that we might want to encourage positive stuff, kind of, you know, rolling on and rolling forward?
I think well, I hope it is changing, and I think really having very honest, open conversations with our children about emotional health and well-being, and really finding out how they feel, and just having those conversations, I think, is a really big start. I think trying to not, this is so hard as parents, because obviously you want the best for your children, but trying to let go of there is a best, or trying to let go of the idea that you know what is best for your child, because actually they are discovering themselves in the same way that we should all give ourselves permission to discover who we are, what we enjoy doing. And I think if we can try and get to a more child-led environment. So I'm not saying don't let your kids do loads of clubs, and I'm not saying, like, of course, if they're doing really well, it can be so hard to, you obviously want to praise them, you want to be affectionate, you want to give them that support. So I'm not saying don't do those things, but I think just making sure it's well-rounded, you know, also give your child praise when things haven't gone so well, you know, allow them to see you making mistakes or apologizing when you get things wrong is really important. And you know, if kids with like the clubs and things, allow them to maybe do a few, but also know that you're not a bad parent if you're letting your kid get bored. Like, you don't have to be there entertaining them all of the time. Actually, they build resilience and their own creativity. They get to find out who they are through being bored. You know, so I think that's really important. So I think there's lots of things we can do. But I think really, if I was going to say like one thing, it's about having these open, honest conversations. And the more we can do that, not just with children, but with other adults, the more we can role model being curious about our emotions, not necessarily having all of the answers, being open and thinking, oh, that's interesting, or I wonder what that's about. I think that allows kids to then express themselves if they see us doing it as adults.
Yeah, definitely. I love that. It's something I've been thinking about recently, actually, because I've been mega busy, which is cool, but I've had some prompts from kind of friends and people in my life about kind of just like slowing down a bit, or maybe like how does that feel in your body? And I'm like, do you know what, I really need to just take a moment here. So just like sometimes having these just tiny little conversations, tiny little prompts from your mates or from your girlfriends or whoever, just to kind of have those little reminders is so important, isn't it? And actually take the time just to feel stuff and be aware and not just distract by doing, you know, another or, you know, whatever this and
it's definitely something, you know, I'm not over this stuff. I'm not perfect at all. I'm someone that thrives off busy, and I love the feeling of achieving and doing. So I'm saying this very much from a place of experience. I think it's about as well checking in with ourselves and really asking, why am I doing this? Is it because I genuinely enjoy this activity? Am I being fulfilled? Am I finding it enriching to my life? Or am I doing it because I'm avoiding emotions? Like, if I'm not busy, I'm feeling a lot of unpleasant, difficult emotions. Or alternatively, am I doing it to prove something to somebody else or myself? Like, am I trying to prove that I'm worth this? And if that is the case, maybe that's about checking in and giving yourself space to work through that, if that's with a therapist or in your own journal or whatever. But really identifying, you know, what is this actually enriching to my life, or is this something else that's playing out here?
Yeah, that's such a good point. Hey, Marin, can we touch back to self-esteem, because I'm really keen to talk about that, and through this lens of motherhood as well.
Yeah.
Does motherhood change it, do you think, for most people? What are people's different kind of approaches to self-esteem, do you think? Is it different for women? Is it different for mothers? What's your kind of experience with, well, either your personal experience or with people that you've worked with? How do you think self-esteem plays out in this role of mother? It's pretty wild, right?
It's pretty wide, because I think people have very different experiences, actually, from talking to people. And not all of my clients are mothers, but, you know, some of them are mainly women. I do work with some men, but mainly women. So that's kind of where my experience is with this. I would say it can be hard, because I think, so self-esteem is about identity, isn't it? You know, it's that gap between what we think we should be doing, or who we should be, and how we perceive ourselves to actually be. So if there is a huge gap there, that can cause us to feel pretty awful about ourselves. So I think if our self-esteem is shaky before having children is probably going to exacerbate it, because, you know, any stressful experience is probably, it's going to make you more aware of that divide, and it might, that whole identity piece changes, doesn't it? We might really lose touch with who we want to be, let alone who we think we should be. So I think it can make things a lot harder. But then on the flip side of that, I also have seen some people become mothers and actually it allows them to let go of some of this stuff. You know, if we're very hard on ourselves, we've been very critical, we've been trying to achieve a lot, sometimes having children kind of gets in the way of all of that. And that can be quite a wake-up call for people about what's important. So I think it can go either way. But I think really, I suppose what I said right at the beginning, you know, self-esteem is going to affect every part of your life in some way. You know, whether that's a challenge in motherhood, or whether it's a professional challenge, you know, how you feel about yourself and your relationship with yourself is going to be expressed there. So I think, yeah, sometimes motherhood can add pressures. You know, we're not sleeping well, we're worrying about another human being. But this work can be always affecting us. We might just not be aware of how much it is. And maybe in those times of stress, we suddenly realize, oh, actually. And then, of course, it's harder as well, isn't it? Because maybe we don't have the time to do the work to heal from that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's such an interesting piece, I think. And yeah, like you said, everyone's experience with that is going to be, it's going to be really different. I think what I find interesting is whether you're aware of it or not, that kind of your self-esteem, like you say, does affect everything. It affects subconsciously all the decisions you make in your life, doesn't it? Kind of relationships you have, conversations that you have, even things like, you know, work decisions, whether you go for that position or not. It's your kind of underlying belief about yourself is going to affect all of the decisions in your life. So it's not to put any extra pressure on, because we definitely don't need pressure on, but it's such an important thing, isn't it, to kind of just be in touch with, I think.
And with motherhood as well, I think we have to acknowledge that there is a big sort of societal narrative about what a mother should be, or maybe not what a mother should be, but what a perfect mother is. And again, it's this impossible standard. You know, a perfect mother in our culture is meant to be someone that works, she has her own job, and she's very passionate and committed to that. Like, she never puts her kids before her work. You know, that's her whole career is there, and that's fine. But she's also, you know, completely attentive to her child's needs. She, you know, sacrifices herself for them. She never puts herself first. You know, she never gets mad. She never gets tired. You know, all of these things where it's just impossible to be all of those things. And so I think that can really play out. If we're not secure in our own self-belief, you know, in who we are and what's important to us, then we can get bombarded from every direction about what we should be doing. And I'm sure you've experienced this. I think all mothers have, that you feel judged. You know, whatever you do, it doesn't matter what you do, that you will feel that at some point. So
I'm always reminded about one of these conversations I had with Bailey, the lovely Bailey from Temple Spa. We had this moment where we both realised that I was feeling maybe a little bit of guilt and a bit of judgment for putting my daughter in preschool full time. I was like, oh God, so that I could work full time, which I needed to do as a single parent. And she was feeling the opposite. She was delaying, I think if I remember this right, she was delaying her son's entry to school by a year, and she was taking an extra year with him. And we were like, so we've basically made opposite decisions, and yet we were both like, oh
yeah, exactly.
It just so perfectly highlights the point that you could be anywhere on that scale of you know, actual decisions, and you will feel the pressure and the judgment. So just, you know, like you're saying, stay true to yourself and your values. This is right for me.
I think that's a really important, I think that's one thing we can actually do, is spend some time reflecting on our values, because they can really guide us as to what's important for us. And we can then, when we feel those moments of pressure, or we hear that little voice in our head saying, oh, well, you should be doing it this way, you can then check in and think, you know, is this one of my values? You know, is this important to me and my family? And then make a decision from that place, rather than this story that may or may not be true. And it may not even be yours. You know, it may come from a parent, it may come from a teacher, it may come from society. And I always think about, you know, confidence. I suppose true confidence is living your life as best you can for you. It's not necessarily about public speaking or being loud. It's about being able to be secure in your decision, that they're the right ones for you. If you're making the right decisions for your life, you will feel confident in those decisions. So I think, that's, again, coming back to those values, you know, and we can all do that. We can all grab a pen and even look up online on Google. You can type in list of values, and you can just look and think, which ones jump out to me? Write them down, and then maybe whittle them down so you've got a list maybe about 5, because you're going to, I think you will know when you see them, oh yes, that's something that's really important to me. And that's where we should be focusing, because there's too much noise otherwise. You know, we can't listen to everything that's being thrown our way.
I love that. I love that idea of kind of giving it a little bit of focus. And also your point on confidence. Yeah, confidence isn't like extrovert, is it? Confidence is like, this is who I am, this is what I believe, this is my thing, and I feel secure about that. Like that kind of quiet inner confidence. Really good, isn't it?
Yeah, because I think we do so often mistake confidence for like being extroverted, and actually you can have people that are pretty quiet and they're quietly confident, you know. So
that's very cool. So can you give us, starting to kind of think about rounding things up now, although I can talk about all this stuff forever, but if someone's kind of, if we've piqued their interest in terms of kind of therapy and looking at these ideas of confidence and self-esteem and kind of looking inward a little bit, if that's wildly new to someone, if they're like, I think I should be looking into this, but I have no idea where to start, have you got any either resources that you could point them in that direction of, or just like little ideas like that, little kind of values and stuff? What's a very gentle way to kind of start dipping a toe into this world?
Yeah, so I think I'd start with saying act curious around your emotions, because I think we can often get stuck in judging ourselves for how we feel, and if we do that, we then layer on more emotions that we have to work through. So yeah, as I said, when you're feeling a strong emotion, maybe just thinking, I notice that feeling, you know, what does that say, what is that telling me? I think that can be a really good starting point to just build that awareness. And I think with self-esteem, I think the thing is we want to like believe that we can just think ourselves out of this, you know, but it's not like that. You know, our beliefs are set in, as I said, a lot of them are set in childhood, and then we look for evidence to back up those beliefs. So all the time your mind is collecting evidence that you're not good enough, because that's where your belief is. So we have to shift that actual belief, we have to get evidence for that. So the only way is to, well, first of all, identify that that's what's happening. But then there's this idea of, you know, if you've got your values, say one of your values is kindness, you need to go out and find evidence that you are living in line with your value. And that will over time change your belief about yourself. So if I identify that my value, is kindness or compassion, can I think, right, I'm going to set myself a challenge for every single day, I'm going to do something kind for someone else. And then as you do that, your brain is collecting that evidence that I'm a kind person and kind is one of my values. So it changes that, what you're, you know, before you're looking for evidence that you're not good enough, if you can change it for looking for evidence that I'm living in line with my values, that's going to help you shift that belief. Oh, I am good enough because my values are what is important and I'm living in line with that. So I think understanding that's really important, because I think people can feel like, well, I want to change how I think and feel, but you can't just say it to yourself and that makes it go away. You know, you can't just say, oh, right, well, it's fine, I'm going to think that I'm good enough now. Like, it's not as easy as that, unfortunately.
I love that idea. It's just kind of shifting that lens a little bit and kind of breaking it down into littler steps, you know, identifying that value, starting to kind of reinforce that idea. That's really cool. I love that. And then, you know, presumably you could build on that and then, you know, identify another value and explore that for a little bit. Yeah, exactly. Until you've got this sort of well-rounded idea of who you are as a person, because you don't need to be the same as your next door neighbor or your best friend. You just need to be comfortable with what your values are, what's important to you and your family. You know, if we talk about motherhood, you know, what's important for you and your child, you know, how are you defining what's important? And maybe that's not doing all of the things. Maybe that's about having lazy days together. If we can flip that and see that as a value rather than something to feel guilty about because we're not entertaining our child at all times. So again, it is all about sort of developing that awareness and that relationship with ourselves. But yeah, values, that's a really important place to start. And also, I guess, being open to the idea that they may change as well. And you may not be the same as your neighbour, but they also may not be the same as you last year. You know, not having this pressure of being like, I need to, this is me, this is my thing. I need to set that in stone, because it kind of doesn't work like that, does it? You know, that might change depending on what's going on in your circumstances, or just new ideas or new evidence. So yeah, I love that idea. Awesome. So can you let people know where we can find you if we want to come and say hi or follow along?
Yeah, so I am on Instagram. My business is called Time to Bloom Therapy. So it's all about sort of taking you from a little seedling to a bloom, working on that relationship with yourself. I do write a monthly email, which is full of self-care ideas for each month, and journaling prompts, things like that. So people can come and sign up. If you go to my Instagram, you can sign up there. And if people would like to work with me, I work one-to-one online, providing therapy. I am often pretty busy. I've got a full caseload. So the best thing to do is to send me an email. You can get on my wait list, and then I can let you know when a space becomes available. So yeah.
Perfect. Lovely. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me this morning.
Oh, lovely. I love talking about this stuff and hopefully helping people. So.
Yeah, it's brilliant. And, like we were saying about things changing and having open conversations, I think the more conversations like that happen, it might be old news to someone, that's cool, but it might be that really fresh little kind of nugget of an idea for someone. And how cool is that? Yeah.
Well, when I first started training, I kind of held in my mind, I was like, if I can go on this journey and if I can help one person feel better than how I felt for so many years, then that would be worth it. Actually just making a difference to one person is huge, isn't it?
Yeah,
so yeah.
Absolutely. Oh, I love it. Keep doing what you're doing. So it's super important work, and we really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you, Sarah. It's been lovely to be here.
Keep in touch, and we'll see you very soon.
Yeah. Bye.
Bye.